Hi, I'm Elizabeth Roof at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, and I'm a senior research specialist. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about parenting a child with Prader-Willi syndrome. You probably have a lot of questions about that, and I'm going to talk about my 20 years of knowledge about what parenting is helpful and what kinds of things that can help your child's behavior become better over time. So as far as parenting goes, the thing you most need to know is that the only thing you really control is you. You can't change your child's behavior unless you change yours. So it's a lot like driving a car. You're going to have to be able to do multiple things at once, all at once, in order to actually operate a vehicle safely. The regular maintenance of yourself is the most important thing. You know that if you take your car out on the road and it's not gassed up and you haven't changed the oil, you're not going to expect good performance. So regular sleep, healthy eating, and doing things you enjoy doing will help you be able to maintain yourself in order to be able to parent your child. I often tell people, you can't parent your child effectively until you take care of you. So the idea that you don't have to take care of yourself and you only focus on your child really in the long run won't get you what you need. And it's a lot like a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're going to have to be doing this for many years, and so taking care of yourself and your other family members is key to actually making yourself the best parent you can be. Characteristics of successful parents are this. They nurture themselves, they take care of themselves, they problem solve as things change, they continue to adapt and change how they do things, and they look at all the circumstances and environment that they have in their life, and they look about how things are changing and they adapt to those circumstances. They don't think, well, I fixed this, I don't need to do anything different now. It's always evolving and changing and being able to do what's best for your child at that point in their life. The most common behavior problems in PWS are this: perseveration, stubbornness, anxiety, being able to have external outbursts at a moment's notice, being easily frustrated, and being stuck on things. These are the things that we find are most common complaints for parents who have a child with PWS. A lot of people wonder about compliance. How do I get my child to do what I want them to do? And I often say it's a little bit like a tow truck. A tow truck is probably not the best way to get around, is it? It's better to be able to drive your car. So towing your child from place to place or trying to get them to do what you want is not going to work if you're always trying to make them do what you want. But there are definitely ways to do that in order for them to actually kind of think it's their own idea and for them to be able to start to learn these techniques on their own and not always rely on you to keep them compliant and not be oppositional. So how you ask your child is the most vital part of compliance. Parents often use a bad tone of voice, a negative tone of voice, a stern face, and they try to command their child to do things. How you ask and how you sell them on an idea is the most important part of parenting. If you ask them in a way that they feel respected and honored and you're trying to get them to do something in a really positive way, they're more likely to actually accommodate that request. If I say something like, "Jimmy, it's time for you to clean your room," Jimmy's probably not going to do that. But if you say, "Jimmy, gosh, if we hurry up and get your room cleaned up, we can actually go ahead and get ready to go to the zoo today. That's going to be a lot of fun." So I put something I want to do behind something I don't want to do so that they're excited about doing that first task in order to get the second task that's really a big reinforcer for them. Again, watching your tone and your expression of your face is really important. I tell people I look at this flight attendant kind of thing. No matter what the request is, you always act like it's the best thing that you've ever asked them to do. So if people say, "I can't get my child to get to the bus on time because their shoes aren't on and their backpack isn't packed," I tell them it's very important to put things like packing the backpack and putting on shoes before they eat breakfast and doing it in a tone that suggests it's cooperative. We're going to get our shoes on so that we can actually go ahead and have breakfast. Is a lot better than saying, "Jimmy, you need to get your shoes on right now in order for him to have breakfast." So it's this idea of asking and requesting in a way that's respectful, kind, with a bright affect, a positive emotion, and again, cooperative language. We're going to do this. This is what's going to happen. And the idea is that if we ask things instead of request them, if you ask, you're often going to get a no because generally kids with PWS can be kind of oppositional. But if you request it in a way where it's not really a question at all, it's actually a statement, you may find that the person with Prader-Willi is more likely to comply with that request because it's really a cooperative thing. We're going to do this so that we get to do this fun thing. Parents don't often realize they get too close to their child with Prader-Willi syndrome. People with Prader-Willi often see this as a direct threat and may become very upset. You know, if you get too close to another driver and you get in their personal space, you're likely to rear end them. Same thing happens with people with Prader-Willi syndrome. They literally shut down and they stop and you run into them. So watching the signs, being alert for their changes in behavior and when they become agitated is huge. Being able to read your child, knowing when they're getting upset, is a great way to always accommodate and manage your own speed and your own kind of personal space to theirs. People often complain the most about anxiety in PWS. Anxiety looks a little bit different. You'll see lots of repetitive questions. You'll sometimes see lots of repetitive behavior. They'll touch things, they'll touch themselves. They basically start to get more and more ramped up until they become to the point where they might actually explode. It's a little bit like a pressure cooker. They can only handle so much anxiety for such amount of time before usually they explode. So sometimes even externalizing behavior and temper tantrums can be an actual point of anxiety and not necessarily just a temper tantrum or not related. It builds over time and it becomes more and more impossible for them to cope with it. Remember, they have often limited coping skills, so your job is to use your coping skills and your ability to read their behavior in a way that's most helpful to curb their anxiety. Limiting them time they can talk about it, having timers set up, limiting how many times you answer a question is a great way to get them off of a topic and not get them stuck. People often say that they use the asked and answered 3 times and you're done. So if you ask a question, you don't answer it more than 3 times because you can't stop the behavior. Only you can stop it by not answering the question. So once they don't get their question answered, they'll often stop asking, but as long as you'll answer, they'll continue to answer and ask it over and over. It's very important for you to understand that you can stop the problem by what you do in response to the question or the behavior. Staying flexible is really important, always knowing that you have the ability to read the situation and to do what's best for your child. And also reframing things. Things that are very annoying to you can also be reframed in a positive way. People with Prader-Willi often like animals. We find that using things like petting an animal or loving on an animal can be very helpful in reducing anxiety. You can also take things that are very stressful and compulsive, like repetitive behaviors, and you can turn them into something positive. I actually had a mom of a young lady who had a lot of repetitive behavior. She turned it into a very positive thing and taught her daughter how to crochet. The daughter now crochets lots of Afghans for babies who she loves and veterans who are returning back from the war front in Afghanistan. So the girl now gets the ability to do something repetitive, but in a way that's very productive and helps other people. And she loves the fact that she gets to meet the people that she makes the quilts for. So again, we can find ways of creatively taking repetitive behaviors and turning them into something positive. What helps? Things like cueing, timers, giving them looks, different colors that they know that this means this and this means that. Red means stop, yellow means go, and yellow means caution, and green means go. Parents need to know that you can have lots of visual things to help your child know when they need to move on to the next topic, when you're done talking about a topic, and when that topic is done and you're no longer going to actually mention it again. Things like timeouts for cooling down are very important. We don't often call it timeout. What we do is say, hey, it looks like you need to take a break. You're getting upset. Why don't you go sit in your beanbag chair and listen to music or do whatever, and we allow them to decide when they're ready to come back to the situation. Backing off and being proactive about situations often help a child with Prader-Willi get their behavior back under control and able to get back to a situation much more quickly than trying to make them do something or put them in timeout in a way that feels punishing. So again, doing something that makes them feel like they need a break and they can take a break often lets them be able to guide the situation and control it in a way that they can actually go back to the situation a lot faster and with a lot less tears and meltdowns than people who try to make kids with Prader-Willi do things. Being connected socially and vocationally and recreational are also important. It's important to have things that you love doing, things that make you happy, and things that make you feel connected. People with Prader-Willi often love playing with animals, finding volunteer jobs at humane societies, things like that, or even walking the family dog or having a dog walking service can find them ways where they're connected to their community, they're doing something productive, and having time that's structured often helps them be able to manage their behavior in a better way than having lots of downtime. The people with the most extreme behavior problems tend to be people without much structure and without a lot of expectations about what their day is going to look like. So basically, they're managing their own behavior on a daily basis, and what happens is they tend to get into more trouble because it's unstructured. If you actually have to go to something like an applied behavior analysis person to actually help you do that, they can often find ways to limit aggression, physical aggression, and verbal aggression in people with Prader-Willi syndrome by structuring the natural environment to accommodate these new changes in behavior. People often ask about psychosis and Prader-Willi syndrome, and I often say it's a little bit like running off the road. You're not going to be able to take care of this on your own. So if your child does become more stuck on things, becomes more disorganized, things like that, it's important to know that you're going to have to get a professional to help you take care of that. Medications often work. You can find that certain medications help better than others, and it's really important for someone who's a professional to help your child get back on track. Even going to a psychiatric hospital or an ER is sometimes necessary to make sure that your child is safe and secure and that their environment is going to be ready for them when they come back to it. But letting the person know that food issues in a psychiatric hospital need to be monitored. Just because my child is thin doesn't mean they don't have hyperphagia is also necessary. So it's your job as a parent is to let people know that, but realize that sometimes you are going to have professionals help you take care of your child, especially if they become psychotic. Psychosis in PWS really does look different. People who have psychosis often get kind of stuck on things. They become obsessed with topics. They will talk about things more and more frequently. And the other thing we notice is that there's always changes in behavior, things like sleeping change, eating change, and also the ability to take care of themselves. Grooming usually tends to become really a hindsight problem. They don't take care of themselves. They maybe look disheveled. But if you see changes in sleeping and eating and other behaviors that look different, you need to go ahead and act very quickly, because I will tell you that usually these behaviors do not go away on their own, and usually medication is the only way to actually treat psychosis and PWS. So be on the lookout, trust your gut, and know when you actually move forward. It can also happen in people who actually have a deletion. There's a common misconception that only people who have UPD subtype of PWS can become psychotic. We actually have several people with deletions who become psychotic, and it always starts with depression. Depression becomes bigger and bigger until eventually they become very disorganized and confused and they become psychotic. So watching the signs, trusting your gut, and knowing that something is different and calling it to someone's attention is a huge problem. As far as parents don't often know that their child is having depression and psychosis, and sometimes professionals don't either. So we need to help you figure out the best way to make use of that information. I often say that parents often look in the rearview mirror of life. They talk about things their child has done on a regular basis and act like nothing is going to change. Children with PWS do grow up, and even though some of the things are definitely similar and don't change, there are changes that happen. So we need to be aware that as parents that we're not looking in the rearview mirror when we really should be looking and keeping our eyes on the road. You have to be aware of what's ahead of you. A lot of people, again, are looking in the rearview mirror and aren't looking ahead. It's very important to be a parent who looks ahead to changes in school changes, home changes, and environmental changes that may change your child's behavior. If you see behavior changes in your child, it's very important for you to look at things in their school environment and their home environment that may actually make these behaviors worse or better. So as a parent, you're always reading the signs, you're always keeping on top of things, and you're always aware that the fact that if you're not actually keeping track of these things, they may actually kind of run into you. So the idea of using journaling or behavior charts are a great way to actually help parents track behavior, see behavior changes over time, and see what kinds of things change behavior. And looking at things like medication changes. Often, sometimes people will not think about medication changes, how they may change behavior, but there are several behaviors that are actually related directly to medication changes. Looking ahead to changes in environment, like changes in school setting, going from middle school to high school and from high school to vocational or other kinds of settings, is really important for parents to know. You can't actually have your car on the road and be able to drive without doing multiple things at once. So looking ahead to changes and seeing where things are going to happen is important to plan for the future. Vocational settings, what kinds of things you need to do to actually keep everybody on the same vein as far as what we need to actually do to help my child plan for the future is really important. Looking at programs in your area, looking at things that are maybe in other places will help you get the best services for your child. You have to observe behavior in context for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. If you look at a behavior that's happening at school but not anywhere else, often you will find there's either less structure at school, there's more access to food at school, or there are people who are not effectively managing your child in a classroom or other settings. Looking how things are different at school and being able to train teachers and other people to work best with your child and what you know works most effectively is a great way to actually make sure that you're helping your child achieve what's best in their environment, and knowing some realistic expectations based on age, based on past behavior, and based on what your child can reasonably be expected to do for themselves. What is the payoff? If a child is having bad behavior and they're being sent home every day or going to the principal's office, often what happens is that place has become very reinforcing. If I pick up my child and I take them home from school after having a bad day and we get to go do something fun, they start to realize being bad has a payoff. avoiding a class or a teacher or a thing you don't like PE or things like that, may be another reason for behavior. Always looking at what the payoff is, what are they getting out of the situation, is a great way to figure out what kinds of behaviors you can effectively change and manage. We don't usually change food behaviors, but we can change food access and people letting our child have food. So it's important to know what you can change and what is not going to change. Skills that help with kids with PWS are things like patient, being calm, being proactive, being able to kind of adapt as things change. Knowing your child's part of a bigger community, family, and world than just themselves, and holding them accountable to those kinds of things is very important. I often tell parents that if their child is not having good behavior, that it's important to use things they really enjoy to reinforce that behavior. If I like to play with dogs or I really enjoy cats, then what I can find is that by having a good day at school, I can come home and walk my dog and go play with other people's pets is a really great way to help reinforce good behavior. But knowing that as they continue to age, you'll continue to adapt what you're going to do and what works with them. Parents who actually can say they're sorry and they've made a mistake and that something hasn't worked out is really important for kids with Prader-Willi to hear. Also, not having to be right. People often realize that they have to have the last word and they have to be right, and usually that means that the person with Prader-Willi feels wrong and they feel humiliated, and that tends to lead to more vindictive behavior in the future. So it is important to be able to say you are sorry and be able to move forward. For a lot of people, they can't move forward. People often say, how do I know if my child with PWS, if their behavior is different from a child with regular behavior problems? I tell people it really doesn't matter. You have to decide what you're okay with, what you're willing to live with, and how best to parent your child. It's important to have values and things that you think are important, as being nice, being kind, being respectful, being quiet at times, things like that. Knowing that it may take more structure for your child to get there, but knowing that having expectations that your child treat people with kindness and respect, and for people to treat your child with kindness and respect is really important. But I think for a lot of people, they're not really sure what they can expect. So having realistic expectations about what their child can do and what's okay for them to do is based on getting input from other people, teachers, professionals, other kinds of things, but also knowing your child really, really well and knowing what works for them. Recording those things down is a great way to keep track of that and to know as things change what you need to do differently, but knowing your child and knowing that you do know your child and what works for them. Parents are really crucial in the whole idea of being what's best for their child. Knowing that if your child is having a problem, that you can work through it, you can problem solve it, and you can expect changes. But it's being consistent, being the same day in and day out, and having realistic expectations. Knowing that your child may not be able to do any things independently at some point, but helping them get along the way for that, such as grooming, taking care of themselves, packing their own backpack, and also being in control of their behavior. Knowing when your child is tired or stressed or lots of things have been changed, that they may have a harder time controlling their behavior, and realizing that you can do a lot to keep those things in check, but also knowing at the same time that keeping things too stable, too consistent will also get your kid into a groove that they won't want to get out of. So it's important to change things up, take baby steps, and realize that your child cannot have things their way all the time. They have to be okay, and you have to be okay with saying sometimes things change, and knowing that they will be okay, especially if you're okay with those same things. Having low expressed emotion, being able to talk in a calm, pleasant voice is really important. That's not the same thing as being negative or angry or stressed, but I think for a lot of parents, they don't seem to realize that their tone is being read very much by their child. So they're looking at your face and your tone of voice to know how they should respond. Thinking about it, taking yourself a timeout and being able to kind of get it together, take a few deep breaths before you talk to your child can help make the difference between them complying with your request or them being unable to comply with your request. We find that parents who talk with the same calm, patient voice find kids don't tend to misbehave so much or get so reactive to those bad things because they see that you're trying your best to stay in control of your emotions, therefore they're able to stay better in control of their emotions. How much control do you really have over your child's behavior? There's definitely genetics, but to say that PWS is the cause of all negative behavior is not really fair because we do have quite a few people that we follow that don't have a ton of behavior problems, and I can't say there's a genetic cause or anything specific that we can put our finger on, but it does seem to be a lack of, parenting or the inability for parents to kind of do things proactively. So we say that it's this idea of controlling environment, and your parenting style to your child's unique genetics. So you know them, you need to know what works well for them and what kinds of requests work well for them versus this idea that every child with PWS is the same, because they certainly are not. And we have parents who are doing a really great job as each stage of their child's life changes, being able to manage that and to manage their behavior. Setting up expectations that are realistic, that can be met, and also shaping behavior a little bit over time is a good way to do it. Knowing that your child didn't learn to tie their shoes overnight, but knowing that it might take multiple steps and multiple ways of explaining it so they do understand it, but also give them the supports that they need. Some parents often think that their child with PWS can fix their own lunch or pack their own lunch or pick out healthy snacks. Though they might do that when you're there, they're very likely to put a little extra in. So knowing that having realistic expectations that they may not be able to control their food issues in those situations, and giving them supports like putting things in Ziploc bags so there's no more, no less than a serving in it, are all things that you can do to effectively manage the expectations so that your child with PWS can be most successful. We find that visual schedules and finding ways for the person with PWS to go from one situation to another is a great way to do that. I'm going to show you a couple examples of that, and also natural transitions. Again, putting on your shoes before the bus comes, putting on your shoes before you eat breakfast, brushing your teeth before you do certain things, are all ways to get them to actually meet certain expectations in a way where you can actually get them to kind of not get stuck on an activity or doing it just a certain way. But having those visual schedules is a great way to help them move from activity to activity. This is an example of an actual schedule. It's something like brushing your teeth, and it has all the steps. People don't realize that people with PWS often get lost in the steps. They know what the end product is supposed to be, but what they don't know is how exactly to get there. So even things like cleaning your room could involve putting all the books on the bookshelf, pulling your covers up to the very top of the bed, fluffing your pillows up and laying them down. Things like that can actually help them do things in a really great way versus telling them to clean their room, which you look in there and you think it's not clean at all. But they get lost in some of the details, so visual schedules really do help. Getting ready for school is a great thing to actually help them be responsible for getting themselves to the bus or to the bus stop on time. So doing things so that they can actually figure out what step comes next, and checking them off is a great way for them to be responsible for some of these things. Transitions are typically very hard for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. They often get stuck on a task or a way they have to do it a certain way, and sometimes we'll find people who do things over and over and they can't move to the next step. Knowing that at times you're going to have to help them transition from one activity to another, and give them a heads up when things are going to change. If they're expecting something to happen after an event and it doesn't, then become very upset. But if you give them a heads up and say, well, today instead of going to horseback riding, we're going to be doing this other thing, they can actually be able to adapt their own expectations and do that. Having a mantra like, it's all okay, we're going with the flow, is a great way for them to start to internalize some of those behaviors that you want them to actually do. They may not always be able to follow through, but they'll start to understand that the expectation is as things change, we don't always control things. The idea of hard now and easy later is a really great way to think about parenting. Doing things and having high expectations for your child is a great way for them to continue to grow and develop as more responsible and kind of independent adults. For people who want to always do things for their child, they make it easy now, but much harder later as the child becomes more and more dependent on that parent to do everything for them and to even cope for them. Negotiating, arguing, and bargaining with your child is usually a very dangerous slope. They can often wear you down by talking about things over and over. Knowing that when you're willing to kind of draw that line in the sand, that you're not willing to actually negotiate or bargain is very important. But also being flexible, knowing that sometimes your child needs to feel like they have some control over the situation. And for us, it's even things like having their blood drawn, not many people like, so we'll say, well, we want to have a blue top or a purple top first. Which one would you like to do first? Giving them choices and the ability to pick a thing that they like doing and then going to the next thing. And that works really great for schools as well, to pick an activity and let your child have some choice over that. But bargaining and negotiating will usually just lead to more problems. Getting really stuck on things tends to actually get you upset, and when you can't control your emotions, they can't control their emotions. Having to be right will often get you road rage. So actually having to have the last word, have your child apologize, or rehash an event that has just happened will get your child with PWS very upset. We think it's better when things go wrong to actually figure out what happened, what things you can control and make better next time, and figure out how your child will respond to that. But also being able to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have expected you to be able to do this is really important. So the idea that as parents, we always are kind of changing and realizing that our behavior affects our child's behavior. Temper tantrums and shutting down are a big part of PWS. Often parents will say, when my child becomes so angry, they're a lump in the floor, you can't talk to them, you can't reason with them, and I tell people that's exactly right. When they're that upset, they literally shut down. It's like rebooting your computer. Hitting the keys and knocking things around will not make your computer work any better, but sometimes turning it off, turning off the power cord and restarting it, you'll actually be able to do that. Some kids with PWS, literally you have to walk away, let them have their tantrum, let them actually get past all that, and some people will actually go to sleep for 15-20 minutes. When they wake up, it's literally like they've been rebooted. So giving them the space and the ability to know that when they're pushed to their limits, they are not going to be able to bounce back. And then deciding at that point, well, John, you've really gotten it together. Looks like we can go ahead and do that fun thing now, and letting it go. We don't need to rehash it, and we don't need to talk about it any further. We just need to figure out what went wrong and what we can do to make it better. When they're usually shutting down, it usually means a couple of things. They're overstimulated, there's too much change going on, and they simply cannot cope with their emotions. Knowing that there's nobody home to talk to reason with, and to go on and on about a situation over and over is important. I tell people it's important to stop talking, look away from them, and find another activity that will keep you busy and keep your focus off of your child. Focusing on them, talking to them, getting close usually only gets someone hit or hurt, and at the end your child had no intention of hurting you, but you got in their space. So it's important for you to know that when they're upset like that, you cannot decide to talk to them, reason with them, or convince them to do something, but letting them reboot, start over, and wiping the slate clean is a great way to go forward from there. Allowing them to calm down is very important. You cannot make them go forward by you wanting them to actually finish a task or do something. So letting them actually have the time and the ability to calm themselves down will work a lot faster than if you try to make them do that. You're not trying to rehash and talk about the past. What you want to do is return to balance. You want to be able to move forward, and it's a little bit like getting your car stuck. Pushing on the gas won't get you stuck out of the mud, but being able to stop your car and find out if you can get some more traction and trying a new solution may do that. So again, what we're talking about is ways to get you not stuck instead of just continuing to spin your wheels. Parenting is hard work. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not, but it is this idea of being proactive, not reactive, and being able to see your child and what their needs are and being able to continue to adapt. So again, just know yourself, know your limitations, but continue to nurture and take care of yourself. You can't do it alone, and there's lots of help available if you ask for it. But it's important for you to know that if you want to make it less stressful, you can follow these rules of the road that will help you be able to manage your child with PWS better. I'd like to thank all of the families who helped us figure out what to know and how to parent a child with Prader-Willi syndrome. We could not do it without you, and we thank you.